Welcome to the Lights Out Podcast. This is Chris Lights Out Lytle, and this is our journey to document the history of mixed martial arts. I have brought with me my friend, the MMA detective Mike Davis, and together we will preserve the history and hear some great stories from the world in the era of the no-holds-barred. Thank you and enjoy.
Welcome to the Lights Out Podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Very special guest, James Werme. James, a legend of the SEG Dark Age era. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mike. Pleased to be here. Excited to be here.
All right. So you're one of those names that like the hardcore fans know, but which, I mean, it pretty much describes our audience, but like the average person might not know. So for our audience, could you just let us know like who you are and what you did for SEG?
Sure. I started working at Semaphore Entertainment Group, specifically on the UFC in 1995. At that time, I was, low guy on the totem pole, handling a lot of different stuff, specifically working for David Isaaks, a lot of business development stuff. Gradually worked my way up, started promoting the live event, and then started handling all the TV stuff, and then started doing the on-air stuff. And by late 90s, I'm running the show day to day. I stayed on through 2001 and then joined Zuffa. I was the only employee to go with the show from New York to Las Vegas. And I spent 1 year with Dana and the Fertittas as a part of Zuffa until my dismissal in 2002. So I'm there from 1995 to 2002, started at the bottom, ended up at the top.
Okay, so we're real fighter heavy, but the administrative side, where people, I think interviewers in general, they fail to understand the chaos that takes place behind the stage, oftentimes far outweighs whatever it is you're watching on TV. And we got you from December 16th, 1995, Ultimate, I mean, all the way through what UFC 33, 34, right over around
35.
there.
35.
Okay.
Show. Yep.
So,
yes, there is a unique chaos to live television, meeting the fight game, meeting a live event arena show. So there's a lot going on, obviously, and it is often chaotic.
Yes. So you mentioned David Isaaks. That's somebody that we've had on the show in the past. First off, the UFC at this point, because I was like a diehard fan from about number 2 on, it was like a dirty word. Like my parents as a child would say, let's not talk about this at the next family party. Let's not do this because it was like frowned upon. So how does somebody like you get into the system, and what's the general reaction of your family?
Let's see. When I got out of college, my first job was at an arena called the Worcester Centrum in my hometown of Worcester, Massachusetts. So I started off in an arena. From there, I went on to work for the World Wrestling Federation, the WWF, now WWE, and was there for several months, and then finally made my way down to New York. I wanted to get into television. So getting to the UFC was something of a gradual process professionally. As far as how it was received, that's kind of a different story. For the most part, 1995, for the most part, people hadn't heard of it. Some people had, oh, that's so crazy. Some people loved it. Oh, that's so cool. So you get the gambit of reaction. I remember playing it for a cousin early on, and him looking at me like I had 3 heads. And I said, isn't this great? You can't take your eyes off it. He said, yeah, I can't take my eyes off a car crash either. It doesn't mean I want to watch it on TV. So it all depended on who you spoke to and their exposure to the event and their familiarity with the event. But it ran, the spectrum of curiosity, excitement, and, befuddlement.
Yes. Yeah. Puzzle. A lot of people they can't wrap their head around it. Yeah. So the ultimate, you wind up with David Isaaks. I was told that you were his assistant when you first came on.
I wouldn't say I was assistant. I was his right hand. I was
Okay.
the only person. I was his staff, basically. Whatever David had an assistant that answered his phone and did his scheduling. I was hired. I think my initial title was Special Projects Coordinator, which was, basically David was the COO, and he was doing a lot of the business development stuff. He had a very cluttered desk. He had a lot going on, and I came in and helped him wherever I could, which was excellent for me because suddenly I was dipping my feet into every aspect of the show, whether it was TV deals or production or promotion or my first actual thing I was in charge of was the 900 number. We used to have a 900 number back in the day, 976 run for UFC. And that obviously had to be written and interviews scheduled and things like that. Bruce Beck used to do the voice, but I did all the writing and the coordination. So whatever came across David's desk, I usually saw a piece of it.
So pre-internet, you would get your daily news or your quickest updates through that 900 number.
Yeah, we did have SEG.com, but it was very rudimentary website. This is the very early days. Not a lot of, I think that was the SEG job was the first job where I used internet. Where I used emails. So that's that's what we're talking about. 1995. But yeah, the 900 number was one of our main promotional tools.
Yeah, I remember that. So at the Ultimate in 1995, it's actually a pretty interesting card. I mean, you got Marco Huas's first loss, Dan Severn beats Tank Abbott, like the first UFC with judges. What was the general feel? Like your first actual event?
Yeah, the general feel that dominated that event was, will there be an event, which would come to be a theme. We had venue issues and had to make a last minute change with the venue. So the major drama surrounding that show was really the live event related, and is this going to go off, and how many people are in the place, is this going to erupt into something? So as very often, external factors took the lead. But great event, great fights, great lineup. And for me, my first show, just wild and exciting to be there live, to be by the octagon and backstage and everywhere. So that was really cool.
Okay. At this time, here at UFC 8, you guys also had a huge fallout. So you go into kind of a little bit of a chaotic situation at UFC 8. You're in Puerto Rico. 2 days before the event, you guys get the carpet pulled out from underneath you, and technically speaking, your event is canceled while everybody is actually on site. Like, when did you hear about this?
Well, the issues actually started about a month prior to that.
Okay.
And I was sent. So we had a promoter who handled our events, and he was kind of AWOL.
So you're talking about, was it Richie Miranda Cortez?
Richie was our local guy, but Buddy was our in-house promoter, Buddy Albin.
Okay.
So Buddy had set up the show. Buddy had got Richie involved, Richie Miranda, and then Buddy kind of went radio silent. We couldn't find him. We didn't know what was going on. So they sent me with a one-way ticket in, about a month ahead of the show. Get down there, meet with this guy, meet with the local promoter, see what's going on, check out the building, make sure tickets are going on sale, get a sense of the climate, get a sense of the feel. So I had to go down, for a week or two just to kind of feel things out and get us up to speed on what was going on, because we didn't know. Fast forward a month later and the show comes down, like so often happened. We became a political football, some local politicians looking to score headlines, etc., speak out against us. Suddenly we're in court. And like you said, the whole week of the show, we were in court. And it was actually, I think, the day before when kind of the shit hit the fan. But the show went off, as it often does.
What did you find out? Like, were you in a meeting? What's the all hands on deck when you guys get the call saying, hey, show's canceled, we've got about 6 figures worth of investment in the event already, and we're not going to get any return.
Yeah, as I recall, it was dodgy, and from a month in, and then when we got there for the show, that's when things got really serious. And Bob was in court all day, and John McCarthy was in court all day, and we had to hire local counsel, etc. But
was it like a shakedown locally? Oftentimes, I mean, I've seen it,
no,
especially in Puerto Rico, where nope, you got to get everybody local.
Yeah, no, I don't think it had anything to do with that. I think it had to do with the event and the violence and the perception and some local politicians trying to score some headlines, score some points, make the other side look bad. That's really what it was, is trying to make the other side look bad, pointing the finger and say, oh, you're going to allow this, look at this, look how bad they are. So it was more of a political football, which is what it usually was in those situations.
And this is like pre-John McCain coming, like dipping his toe into the water.
Yeah, I forget when he sent out the letters. I forget the date on when Bob debated him on Larry King Live. But that was pretty early in my tenure. So it was right around that time, this time.
All right. You had mentioned Buddy Albin going radio silent. And the controversy in regards to him takes place March 30th, 1996. It's like a controversy that people, they'll acknowledge there's issues there, but they'll never say really what they were. The IFC in Ukraine, you had Buddy Albin as the lead promoter. They were using the UFC name. They even had to paint over the UFC logo on the actual canvas. Was this the reason that he was kind of starting to be dodgy with you guys?
I think he was dodgy in general. And I think maybe he drank too much at times. But it was certainly the really in Puerto Rico is when the rift began, and that was when I started to promote the live event. I don't know if it was like before the Puerto Rico show or right after the Puerto Rico show. Bob called me in. Bob, David Campbell are in the office. Bob looks at me and says, "Did you promote WWF live events?" "Yes, I did." "Can you promote the UFC live event?" "Yes, I can." "Okay, thank you, goodbye." And then Buddy was gone. So okay. I think Buddy had a track record of dodginess, perhaps, and they were happy to have someone in the office that could fill that role, and they did.
Okay, so that Ukraine event, the fallout in regards to it, I mean, Ron Van Cleef lost his job as commissioner with you guys. Andy Anderson's name was thrown around by Art Davie in John McCarthy, somebody that kind of gave him up or whatever it is, that means. And, Buddy Albin's got his fingerprints all over it. What was your take on the administrative side of what happened with that event?
I mean, it was bullshit what they were doing. And
what were they doing exactly?
I think they were trying to present an event as the UFC, which is not cool. Yeah, I mean, I don't know a whole lot about that. I heard rumblings, and obviously it caused rifts. But this happened a lot where it usually wasn't people in the family that were doing that kind of trying to rip us off. But I think they were misrepresenting themselves as being the UFC. I don't know a whole lot of detail about it. I know that if it caused the separation, Buddy was gone, Braun was gone, the Black Dragon was gone, so that was it.
And Art Davie was under scrutiny. He was obviously denying it. Andy Anderson, Big John McCarthy were both pointing fingers at him in regards to it.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
It seems to me like, I don't know anything. I wasn't there. But it seems to me like they got like a local government contract or something, gave a whole bunch of promises, and then tried to keep the money and skirt around the UFC in order to keep it. Am I off on that?
That I don't know. I don't know it that deep. Okay. I just really from a superficial level, I had only been there a few months. That was a Bob David Campbell situation. So I was not privy to all those conversations or the fallout. Yeah, they just wanted to know if someone could replace Buddy. I said, yes, I can. And that was it.
Right. I think that Puerto Rico event, UFC 8 also, I think it put the bug in John McCain's ear of, man, I could also do this, because at UFC 9 was the first time he started contacting cable providers to get you guys pulled off. And that's the famous dance in Detroit where Ken Shamrock and Dan Severn pretty much just refused to fight each other.
Yeah, very disappointing main event, obviously. And that was a huge show. We were very excited about that show. I had booked Cobo Hall through an old friend at the WWF. And so, that was a major venue. We sold 6,000 tickets in the on sale. It was going to be great. And again, we became a political football in court all week. That show, we were in court up until the day of, a few hours before. Everyone knows the story about the rules changes and things like that. So, yeah, it was a sign of the times. It was a sign of things to come. Tough, real tough.
The first time the UFC didn't have growth after a pay-per-view as well. It actually declined because of that main event.
Yeah, I mean, it was tough. It was a tough one. And we were very excited, obviously, to have two legends in there in the main event. And for it to kind of be a dud was really a real bummer.
All right. So Art Davie and Bob Meyrowitz, how would you describe their relationship at this time before the split?
Well, Bob is the boss, right? Bob is always the boss. Bob runs the show. Bob owns the show. Bob pays for everything. He's the boss. Art is a hustler. And at that time, they had, before I had gotten there, they severed their partnership with WOW, which was Art and Horian. So Art was kind of bouncing around on the hustle, trying to do this, trying to do that, wearing his tuxedo, sitting ringside, strapping on belts, being the showman that he likes to be. My encounters with Art in those days were he would show up at the office every few months with a new idea on how to license something about the UFC, put a little dough in his pocket. They did some instructional videos. They did like a gym membership thing. So Art was a hustler, and he was always on the hustle. And I think it felt like he was tolerated and used for what he was good at, which is sitting ringside wearing a tuxedo and saying nice things to the champ or whoever wins. So I wouldn't say it was contentious, but I wouldn't say it was, totally warm.
When you watch the videos, it's almost palpable. Like, I don't think Art respected Bob, and Bob certainly that got under his skin, and it appeared that he was always trying to figure a way out with Art.
Well, I guess, picture the situation. Art's going from partner to now consultant. And matchmaker. So Art was making the matches, and he was doing his hustles, and he was representing the show wherever he could and however he could. But Bob's the boss, and so if you don't respect that, you're gonna feel something in return.
Yeah, you're gonna have a reaction. You're gonna get a reaction. Yeah. And from Art to go from partner, as you had said, to consultant, did he believe in the product?
Oh, I think he did, because I think he thought it was his ticket. I think he was going to ride this horse as long as he could and milk it for all he could. And Art was enthusiastic and happy to be there, and he wasn't difficult to be around in any way. And remember, I was a lower guy on the totem pole, so it's not like I was at that time in the closed door sessions, so I don't know everything. But yeah, I think he believed in success, and he believed in a circus, and he wanted to be a part of both of those things.
Like Meyrowitz, you had just said, hey, he was always kind of looking for another idea, put some money in his pocket, licensing. Like Meyrowitz hung almost like a carrot in front of his face in regards to, okay, well, I'll give you this amount of cash, but you go from partner to consultant, and and Horian as well, and Art bid on that. Had he not, I mean,
Yeah, who knows, but why wouldn't he? It's a successful gig, opportunities for other streams of revenue, other hustles, FaceTime on TV, wear the tuxedo, strap on the belt. Don't discount that in Art's desire to remain a part of the show.
Yeah, yeah. And as good as it was as a matchmaker and kind of putting everything together, Meyrowitz was equally a savage in that courtroom.
Well, Bob is a real guy. Bob is a real entertainment entrepreneur, businessman. When I walked, 23 years old, David's taking me around the office to meet all the higher ups, and I walk into Bob Meyrowitz's office. First of all, it's a big, beautiful corner office on 57th and Madison in Manhattan. But, behind Bob's desk is a picture of him and Mick, him and Bruce, him and Sting. And not like candids, let's take a picture, like, working together, having conversations. So, Bob is a real guy. He had done a lot of real events. He had done huge stadium shows for Amnesty International with Bruce and Sting and Peter Gabriel. He did History of Rock and Roll for HBO with Quincy Jones. So, not even to mention the King Biscuit Flower Hour, which is how he made his bones. So Bob is a real savvy, real knowledgeable, real connected, real New York entertainment guy.
Yeah, and him and I had heard after we interviewed him, I had several people reach out and they say, man, Bob not only is an incredible lawyer, but his brother is even more savage. Mm-hmm. And to kind of fend off what is happening here, your next event at UFC 10, it moved from Providence, Rhode Island, all the way to Birmingham, Alabama. Like, you guys you're going into court, you're dealing with a whole bunch of shit. You kind of got to figure out if you're going to take an L or a W. Should we move? Should we stay? You're talking about taking years off people's lives with
there was no such
stress.
There was no such thing as taking an L. So kind of the way it shook down is David Meyrowitz, who was our lawyer, his firm, they would send to David Isaaks and myself a list of states we thought we could do it in. So I would spend a portion of my day, every day, talking to venues in those states to talk about available dates and introducing them to the event, perhaps sending out tapes, etc. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure, one of the things that I certainly stressed when I got there, is that we needed to start promoting the next show during the current show. We have these eyeballs.
Right.
We got to lock in
action.
We got to lock in the building. We got to be able to say, here's the next show. Here's where it's happening. Tickets on sale tomorrow, or tickets on sale now. So, that's great in theory, but you're letting the cat out of the bag right away. And that's what happened in Providence. We thought we could do it in Rhode Island. We announced the on sale. Things go belly up. We're scurrying around. And again, this are the themes and these are the sign of the times. So we're scurrying around. Alabama was another state we thought we could pull it off. We went down there, myself, David, maybe some of the technical people, found a venue, and that's where we were.
It almost become your base. Yeah, it became your home base. Yeah.
Well, the South became a very safe and happy place to do it. There was a string of Birminghams and Augustas and Bay St. Louis and Mobile and Lake Charles and New Orleans, and Solid South was very helpful in those dark days.
Right. It was Bruce Buffer's debut as well at UFC 10. Do you remember his first day at work?
I remember us hiring Buff. Actually, the first Bruce Buffer was
in Puerto Rico. He was in Puerto Rico, right?
No. I forget Buff's first. Buff's first introduction was as Scott Ferozzo's manager. That was his actual foray into the world of UFC. And then, Buff is an incredible marketer and self-promoter, and pretty soon he was on the mic. We thought the association and the name was a good thing, and he wanted to do it. So I forget Buff's first show.
It was 10. It was UFC 10. He was in attendance in Puerto Rico with Ferozzo, and as I think they met on a golf course. I don't know, something weird, something strange.
But then we tried someone else a few shows in, Manny Garcia, but he only lasted, I think, one show. So Buff was in, he was out, then he was back in for good.
Right. And the UFC 11 is Mark Coleman's debut, and he wins. He wins the 10. I apologize. Right, he wins the title at UFC 11. You guys couldn't pull together a main event because the locker room was so beat up. Did they have you scrambling, talking to fighters about trying to fight Coleman?
No. At that time, my responsibilities would have lay in the arena. At that time, Bob's there, Campbell's there, David's there, Art's there. So they're the ones backstage handling that. My responsibilities at that time, I'm on headset. I'm a liaison between production and the arena. So by the octagon or somewhere in the crowd or at the TV truck, things like that. I didn't get too heavily involved with the fighter stuff until later.
Okay. Igor Vovchanchyn was reported to be an invited guest or participant at UFC 11. He was also in that IFC show with Buddy Albin and that huge fallout. Was that more of a fact-finding mission, or was he legitimately invited?
He was legit. We wanted Igor. I stood in line at INS in New York for hours one day with paperwork. We had done the paperwork. We made efforts to try to get him in. And like I said, I went down to the INS building and I was there all day. And it just didn't work out, whether it was a visa issue or I forget what the paperwork issue was, but it was a paperwork issue, I think. I don't know that we got so far into it where purse or show was involved, but
okay.
I was sent to INS to get him into the country or to prepare the paperwork and get him a visa or whatever we needed. But we were unsuccessful, and whether it was we was not able to happen or we just decided it was too much red tape, it did not happen.
Okay, so you guys, was this your first time dealing with INS? I know you've had, obviously a ton of Brazilians on before.
Yeah, it was the first time it was the first time we had ever had to do something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Usually there's a little bit of trial and error in regards to that.
Yeah, I don't remember ever having issues with travels for the Brazilians, them coming in or when we went down to do the show.
It was rocky right now with Art Davie and Bob Meyrowitz. Were there conversations about replacing him? Is this when it started or was it after?
That I would not know. Again, that would have been behind closed doors, probably Bob, Campbell, David, talking about Art, what to do, how to handle. So I would not have been privy to those conversations, but I could feel that we were going to make a move.
And that pool is really shallow to pick from. You're talking about a sport that you guys, there's not a lot of other organizations around at this time, and your only other option is really John Perretti.
Well, I wouldn't say he was our only option. I think he was the best option. Extreme Battlecade was obviously our competitor, but we did respect the fights. We thought their fights were great. We thought their fighters were great. They had excellent pedigree, great credentials, and the credit for that goes to John Perretti. So when we needed someone, he seemed like the obvious choice, really. He was already plugged into that world. He was good at it, took it very seriously. So, he seemed like a good option, the natural option.
The Extreme Battlecade 2 in Quebec, where there was a lot of fallout with the arrests of the fighters and the shutting down of the show. It's been stated publicly by several people that the UFC applied pressure on some of the Canadian authorities in order to try to shut the show down. Were you privy to any of those conversations at the time?
I don't know anything about that. I don't. I really don't. Again, this is early in my days. So you still have Campbell, you still have Bob, you still have David. Obviously, Bob was around the whole time. But so just to kind of lay out the land. So in 97, a couple of big things happened in the office. In 97, Campbell starts to get phased out, and David becomes the lead executive on the show. And also in 97, our in-house producer gets phased out. So I take on a lot of the production role, and we hire a sports production company to handle the live show on site.
Okay.
So
all right.
just so you understand how the executives were shaking down and who was having these conversations. Bob is always at the top, start the beginning to end. But there's a phase out of Campbell. There's a phase out of the in-house producer. His name is Michael Pilot. And then eventually David Isaaks leaves in 98, but we'll get to that.
Right. So a lot of these guys had questionable management. It was like, I don't know if they were their friend, an opportunist, but like real managers in the sport really didn't exist at this time. And Robert DePersia he pressured Mark. Yeah, there was a rumor that he pressured Mark Hall to throw his fight against Don Fry. Do you remember hearing any wind of that?
I mean, no. Obviously Mark was overmatched, and no one wants anyone to get hurt. But Mark was a gamer. So, if you've seen that fight, Mark takes a lot of punishment, and Don is kind of telling him, hey, dude, enough's enough. Give up. Back to what you originally said about the management and the characters that would find their way to the UFC, especially in the early days. That was a very interesting and very fight game, right? Anyone who's been around the fight game knows that it attracts all sorts of characters. And the UFC, being on the fringe of the fight game, attracted even more fringier characters. So there is a host, a long list of interesting, shady characters that came and went. It was wild because someone would come in and they'd be around and they'd almost be like important based on who they were representing, and then poof, they're gone. So there's a lot of those characters who come and go. DePersia's one of them. He had Dan, he had Don. So yeah, but as far as telling Mark to throw the fight, yeah, I don't know. That would have been a conversation that they had. I know that Mark was overmatched. I know that Don didn't want to hurt anybody, or at least didn't want to hurt Mark.
Yeah, they fought a couple times prior. Yeah.
Didn't
Charlie
want to hurt him again.
Yeah.
Charlie Anzalone. There you go.
Charlie
That's
Anzalone.
another one. Yeah. Just another in a long list of characters. Charlie Anzalone, Andy Anderson, Buddy Albin, Robert DePersia, Richard Hamilton. There's all sorts of.
Okay, you brought up Richard Hamilton. What was your experience like with him?
I had very little experiences with him. As I said, he was one of those guys that was suddenly on the scene with the Team Phoenix. Suddenly they're all wearing the same T-shirts, and he's got Dan and he's got Don and
Coleman.
He got Coleman as well. So nobody knew who this guy was, but suddenly he's here and he's in the corner of all of our top fighters, and then he's gone. So I don't know a lot about him. I had zero to very little interaction. He was a trainer who was in the corner, so I don't know much. I didn't know much about him.
Did you know why he left?
No idea. They came and they went in those days.
Yeah. Well, the FBI helped him leave.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was Dan Severn's original manager and trainer. Turns out he's on the witness protection program. It's real sketchy. I can't find much. I'm told child sex trafficking, like he's, hiding out with that stuff, gets caught having, relations with an underage student, and the FBI got involved. Because he was, his handlers couldn't believe he was around children.
Yeah, I didn't know that guy.
Yeah.
As I said, he was around for a few shows, and then he wasn't. Like many.
Yeah, there was also rumors. John Perretti in our interview said that Charlie Anzalone was kicking up to Art Davie.
There was always rumors of that, and I know John has said that, and John said he has spoken to reliable sources and actually has proof. And I wouldn't put it past Art, honestly. There were some interesting matches from interesting guys in those days. Art was always on the hustle. So I don't know.
It still takes place today. And anybody going, oh my God, I can't believe it. Today, it still takes place. So
I mean,
it's part of the game.
Yeah. Fight game is unique.
Yeah, it's part of the game. When you guys moved from Niagara Falls, New York to Dothan, Alabama, in our Meyrowitz interview, they largely point the finger at Perretti going to Madison Square Garden with Battlecade for the reason for New York just having an absolute moratorium, scorched earth, no MMA in our state. What do you recall about how this went down and the reason why?
This was obviously a crushing and disappointing and infuriating situation. And yes, Battlecade deserves a lot of the blame. I don't know if John personally, the person running that business was a guy named Donald Zuckerman, who made most of the business decisions. John did a lot of the face work, the face time, and he was a spokesperson. I don't know if he was making all of the business decisions at that time, but yeah, that was a terrible thing, and they screwed up New York for everyone. You could also lay blame with the politicians, Giuliani and Pataki, who did not stand by their athletic commission and decided to do a complete 180 on a decision that had been made months before that. Yeah, things would have been very different if that had gone through. We were making plans. The whole reason we went to Niagara Falls was to be off the radar. But I had already scouted the Nassau Coliseum on Long Island. We were going to be there 2 months later, and then obviously, we would have tried to head to the Garden. But Battlecade, certainly their actions did not help, and the domino effect of it was, as everyone knows, we had to leave. We didn't get kicked out. We had to leave.
Okay, so you're the event guy in regards to on-site. How do you wind up in Dothan, Alabama on what, 36 hours notice, or is it less?
24 hours. Yeah. Well, when we started having real issues with the show in Puerto Rico, certainly, and then Detroit was a real scary thing. I think it was right around there or right after that David told me to start booking a backup building. We always had a backup building. And so this was no different. Although I think we didn't book it until much later. I don't think I did the survey on Dothan until a couple weeks before that. But Dothan was booked, so we had a place to go. That was standard operating procedure in those days. So
okay, was there anything at that venue already there that the site was willing to cancel?
No.
You just walked in. Okay.
No, but we had it on hold because it was available. So it's not like they had to cancel any events or anything. But there was no equipment, not even a deposit. I don't think at those times. It was a small town place. They were empty anyway. The mayor's office was in the building. It was that kind of deal. So I knew they were available. We knew they were available, and that was our backup venue. Obviously, you never want that to happen, but it did.
Logistics. What was it like getting everybody from New York to Dothan, Alabama?
I mean, it was a nightmare, and it was incredibly costly, and it was an incredible feat of human willingness to come together and work towards a common goal. And you got to spotlight the heroes of that day. So we pulled the trigger on Dothan probably at like 5 o'clock on Thursday, the day before. I remember talking to David. He said, go see if we can go. It was available. Okay, we're going. He went into the press conference, into the press room to tell everyone we were moving, not to where we were moving, but that we were moving. I went over to the building to rally the troops and get everything packed up. But Bob was still in New York City. He wasn't with us. Bob got the airplanes. David was in charge on the ground. I was at the building.
Let's talk about the cage. How do you? I was told you guys got an airplane just for the cage.
Yeah, we got 2 airplanes. We got a DC-9 for the Octagon, and we got a 747, 757 for the personnel. Yeah, I went over to the building. I pulled together our technical producer, our lighting director, the guy that was in charge of the Octagon. So Al Connell, George Smith, Jason Cusson. Here's the deal, guys. We got to go. So the only thing we need to take is the Octagon. So pack it up. We'll be back. We're coming back. We'll figure the rest of it out. But the show is going to be in Dothan, Alabama. Here's the address. Al, let's try to scramble. We need another TV truck. We need the generators. We need the uplink. George Smith, lighting director. George, get us the best rig you can get. Scramble it to Dothan right now.
Oh my gosh.
Jason, get the crew together. Pack up the Octagon because we're taking it. So I was kind of in charge of the arena breakdown. David was in charge of everything on the ground over at the hotel with the fighters.
You didn't sleep. There's no way you slept.
No, not that night. Oh, I mean, we're not even to that point. It's still like 7, 8 o'clock at this point. A huge, a big time hero from that whole debacle success triumph is Elaine McCarthy. At that time, Elaine was doing all the fighter coordination, travel. Her travel agency booked a lot of our stuff. So Elaine got the hotels and the buses and all that type of logistics to make sure that everyone, when we got there, would be taken care of. So it was a giant thing. By the time we got on the plane, it was, midnight, I guess. By the time we couldn't fly in to Dothan because the airport was too small for the plane, we had to fly into Montgomery.
Oh my God.
We all got on buses. That was a 2-hour bus ride.
Unload the cage again, put it into a truck.
Everything had to be unloaded and trucked to the building. So I remember, there's so many interesting little tidbits. When I was at the building after, we kind of had that meeting, I remember I called the local newspaper, the Dothan Eagle, and to try to get something in the paper. And it was late. It was, 4 or 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock maybe. So I called the paper and I said, hey, we got a big event. We're coming tomorrow. Is there any way we can get an article or place an ad or, at least get a blurb, give us something. Yeah. And the guy says, well, it's closing time here. He said to me, if you want to write something and send it to me, I'll try to get it in. So I wrote up, a couple paragraph blurb and faxed it, right? Just to date ourselves, faxed it down there. So, we get on the plane, we get everything there, we get there. It's by the time we get to Montgomery, 2-hour bus ride, we get to Dothan, it's probably 5 a.m. We're going to try to load in as early as possible, 6 a.m. So myself and some of the key staff, we went to a Waffle House, which was near the building. And as we're walking into the Waffle House, they had those old style, the newspapers that you put in your quarter and you pull down the front, you take off the stack. And on the front page of the Dothan Eagle, it said, "Ultimate fighting comes to Dothan." So something happened between me sending the blurb and maybe they made a few phone calls, but we were above the fold, headline, "Ultimate fighting comes to Dothan." It was like, that was the first, like, hey, maybe we're going to be okay. Maybe we're going to catch a break. Maybe this is going to be okay. So it was, the optimism after the night of hell, that walking into that Waffle House and seeing the front page of that newspaper was like the first glimmer of hope that, we're going to be okay. And it ended up working out okay. Easily the most rewarding professional experience of my life. And like I said, everyone came together towards a common goal. It really fused everyone, whether it was the fighters, the entourage, the staff, the production people, that everyone involved, the press, everyone was willing to lend a hand. Everyone could realize how big the stakes were. And it was a family working towards a common goal. It was really incredible. And the feeling when we went live that night was like, wow, we did it.
And then afterward, the adrenaline. Yeah, you still didn't sleep. Yeah.
Well, we had to go back to Niagara Falls, and because we were still in the hotel rooms there. This was just a 24-hour interlude because everyone's travel was out of Niagara Falls. So for the most part, a lot of people had to go back to New York. There was a lot of stuff still in the building. There was a lot of work still to be done in Niagara Falls. But yes, elation and a real sense of accomplishment. I'm very proud of what everyone was able to accomplish. It was a real team effort, and a lot of people came through big time.
Yeah, I mean, truly incredible. It spoke volumes of your company and the depth of the people working there. Yeah, big time, big time. I don't think many organizations, even at the highest levels today, could pull that off.
Well, it starts with believing you can do it and really not having a choice. If we don't get that show off on the air, maybe it's over. It's over for the employees.
Yeah.
It's over for the freelancers. It's over for the fighters. It's over for the managers. It's over for the press. So we just couldn't let it happen. And, David's leadership was incredible that day. Like I said, David, Elaine, Al, Jason, George, Bob got the airplanes. He wasn't there, but he made sure those airplanes came and got us. So yeah, really incredible team effort.
Yeah, wow. UFC 13 marks the first appearance of Tito Ortiz. Dana White was his manager. Do you remember dealing with Dana at this point?
I don't believe Dana was Tito's manager at that time.
Really?
No way.
Why are you so confident in that?
Well, I think because Dana started managing Chuck first. And when Tito fought at 13, he was fighting as an amateur because he was still in junior college because he was working out with Abbott. So Tito was part of the tank entourage.
And Ruiz, squad. Paul Herrera. Okay.
Yeah, all those guys. So
okay.
Dana doesn't show up. I have trouble pinpointing exactly when Dana shows up. And it is important. But it's not at 13. No way. Not
no
even
way.
Close.
Okay.
No way.
Okay. That's fair. UFC 14, Mark Coleman versus Maurice Smith. My theory in regards to this is, here you got Maurice Smith that's never fought in UFC, 500 record. When Mark Coleman wins his last fight, you guys throw names like Don Fry, Tank Abbott, Ken Shamrock. Like there's a bunch of names being mentioned. Maurice Smith isn't even close to that conversation. Did John Perretti kind of have his fingers in the mix? Was he part of the ingredients of putting together that fight?
He couldn't have been, because John doesn't join the organization until the first Japan show, which is it's a few shows later, actually. So here's my take on this, and I've read your article and I respect your opinion. I don't agree with it, and here's why.
Okay. Wait, and let me encapsulate. I believe if you watch Mark Coleman's fights all together, I thought that the UFC brass was wanting to get Mark Coleman out of their system. That's in it. I wrote it out. That's what it was. So go ahead and your comment on it.
Yep. I don't agree with what you're saying for a number of reasons. First of all, we wanted the Ultimate Fighting Championship champion to look like the toughest badass in the world. Mark Coleman looks like the toughest badass in the world. I'll say that. Secondly, Mark came from incredible pedigree and had incredible credentials. Ohio State, national champion, Olympic trials. This is Americana, poster boy, Midwest wrestling stud. As far as Maurice goes, if I'm not mistaken, Extreme's last show is in March of '97. And this show is when?
This is was July 27th.
So this is
1997.
this is a few months after Extreme goes under, after Battlecade goes under. Right?
Yeah, you're right.
So
And Kenny Monday's also on the card.
What's the best way to put the final nail in Battlecade's coffin than for Coleman to kick the shit out of their champion?
Their champion.
So on many levels, I bring that up
as a WWE guy. You bring that up.
I just bring as a fight guy. The best way to discredit an organization is to beat their champ. And as well, in defense of Maurice, who Mo I love, and Mo is a badass also. You're talking about a legitimate, probably the most decorated, legitimate kickboxing champ. At least at that
on your roster.
At least at that time in the UFC ever. So Mo's a legitimate kickboxing champ. He's a rival organization's champ, heavyweight champ. We've got this Hulk that smashes everything in his path. So I don't know how things ended up at Mo versus Mark, but I don't see anything wrong with that fight. I mean, we had already seen him fight Fry. Abbott, we probably know how that's going to go. But what happens when he gets in there with a legit kickboxing champion and we can defeat our former rivals champion at the same time? Mark, we supported Mark. We liked Mark. Maybe not everyone loves the ground and pound and the wrestler style, but, I remember going with Mark on a trip to Charlotte. We spent a weekend together when he was champ. So we put him out front. We sent him on appearances, autograph signings and cable system meet and greets. And we went to a NASCAR event down in Charlotte. So I don't feel like we ever purposely did anything to damage Mark. He was our champ. He looked like a badass. So I do disagree with.
It's cool. Yeah. Hey, I wasn't there. You were.
But had you never thought about Mo's credentials and the fact that he was the Battlecade champ?
Well, I mean, his credentials are fantastic, except, he's got a 500 record. He's got a 500 record and he's never fought in your organization. Other than a Battlecade champion, there should be no other reason why he was in there at that night. I'm not saying in the future, but that night. But
fair enough.
That's also a very good point on your end.
Yeah, and you're also trying to bring logic to the matchmaking at that time, which wasn't always logical.
No, still isn't. To a certain degree.
Not until John Perretti got involved did we start to see top to bottom high level of athlete. We were still playing to the spectacle sideshow angle of things. Art was still making fights at that time, as I recall. So, but then here's another thing. How can that be? How can we be trying to get Mark beat when Mo came in as such a heavy underdog? Mo comes in as a heavy underdog. So how can it be perceived that we're trying to get him beat with Mo? Right?
Yeah. And I know Coleman was told a few months prior from Frank Shamrock that Maurice Smith's his next opponent and don't take him lightly. And Coleman in our interview said, I found out 3 weeks prior. So, little things like that. I don't know. You said, I'm trying to use logic, and it's the fight game. Like anything could happen, anything.
Right. And I don't know the timeline. But I think Mark would probably also tell you that he maybe didn't take it as seriously as he should have.
He 100% said that. Yeah. I mean, that out of his mouth, he absolutely said that. Bruce Beck.
That's what happens. That's what happens in the UFC when you think someone's unbeatable, that's when they lose.
Yeah. Yeah. Bruce Beck started at UFC 4. His last event was UFC 15. What was the reason for his departure?
He got the NBC weekend job in New York, so he couldn't be there. Bruce is now he's the everyday guy. But when he first got that job, Len Berman was still doing Monday to Friday, and Bruce was the weekend guy. Our shows were on a Friday night, so he scheduling wise, he couldn't be there.
I sent him an email looking for an interview. Never got anything back.
Bruce was great. Real pro.
He was phenomenal.
Real pro. Well, Bruce had done all the big boxing events of that time because he used to do the English call for the international feed. So all the Tyson, all the Holyfield, all the big fights of that day, Bruce is on those fights. So we were lucky to have him, and he did an incredible job. Real pro.
Yeah, he was one of my favorites. After UFC 15, you guys fired Art Davie. How do you remember that going down?
I think Bob, whenever there was a big announcement, Bob would call everyone into the office. He would say, Art Davie is no longer the matchmaker. This office has no communications and no relationship with Art Davie. Thank you very much. And that was it. Yeah, there's not a lot. It was.
Did you see it coming?
I guess. I mean, again, I hadn't been around since the very beginning, so I didn't know Art as well as these guys. And in discussions like that at that time, it would have been Bob David Campbell. At that time I was still a soldier, so the generals would have been handling that. But I don't think it was a tearful or emotional in any way. It was very much, this is what we're doing, this is what's happening, move on.
Did you hear any rumors prior to this, or was it pretty tight-lipped?
Tight-lipped, I would say.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I assume that someone had been talking to John Perretti. He was available. I don't think that we would have made that kind of move without having someone to go to. And I remember it being pretty seamless. Art's out, Perretti's going to do it. So,
Perretti also kind of came on as like a secondary matchmaker to help out. We had asked Meyrowitz in regards to, was this done to take power away from Art Davie? And pretty much said, duh, without, he was a little kind about it. I had no idea. I never thought about that. I mean, it was.
I don't know that. To my knowledge, I don't believe we had too much communication with John until we hired him.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I mean, not only because he was working with with Battlecade, but he also did the Contenders late in, I think it was 97.
97, yeah, phenomenal.
So I don't think we would have had a relationship with someone that was doing a competitive show at that time. I'm pretty sure that we dropped Art and grabbed John right before Japan.
Well, you guys were getting picked off by Japan as well. Like Randy Couture beats Maurice Smith, relinquishes title, signs with Japan Valley Tudo. Coleman had made his way over there eventually. Mark Kerr. What was it like dealing with Japan and them poaching your talent?
Well, there wasn't a ton of dealings because they were poaching our talent. But again, it was a sign of the times. The heavyweights command the biggest purses. We didn't have the money to compete with those organizations or what they were willing to pay those guys. And as a result, we ended up losing, most of our top heavyweights.
Yeah. That UFC Japan is referred to as 15.5. What was the Yakuza interaction, or what was the overall feel in regards to dealing with them?
I never felt, and we did 4 shows in Japan, and we had local partners for every show. I can tell you that I never felt uncomfortable or unsafe or threatened in any way. Was there always black suits around? Yes. Is the fight game in Japan usually associated with the Yakuza? Yes. Did I feel that in any way? Did we feel that in any way? No. So it was business.
But you guys were hemorrhaging money at this point, with the John McCain issues. Why would you guys continue to go back to Japan rather than just build like regionally within the United States?
Because those are cheap shows. Anytime we brought excuse me, anytime we brought the UFC overseas, a lot of the financial burden for those shows was assumed by our overseas partners. So those are cheap shows. So they actually made perfect sense at the time, especially the last 3 Japan shows. The first Japan show we did same day delay. So we had our production personnel, we had our commentators, we had a TV truck and all that goes with it, uplink, etc. The next 3 shows we did in Japan, we didn't air until 4 or 5 days later. So not only were our partners shouldering the burden of the purse for the fighters, but now they're shouldering all the production, and I would just walk with tapes, come home, put the show together with our longtime UFC editor, a guy named Jim Snarsky, and air the show 4 or 5 days later. Remember, this is before everyone was up to date on everything minute by minute. We were able to do a show in Japan on a Saturday or a Sunday, and I would bring the tapes home. We whack the show together, bring in Goldie and Jeff, call it off the monitor on Wednesday or Thursday, bring it to the uplink spot in New York City, and air it on Friday night. So those were very affordable shows, allowed us to keep the show going, frankly. That's why we did so many of those Japan shows in the late 90s. And the Brazil show was no different.
Well, we had mentioned that no issues with Yakuza. You felt comfortable. Conan Silveira versus Sakuraba. Fight gets stopped early. The first one, Conan goes back to his locker room. In our interview with Conan, he said they were pounding on his door, forcing him to go out, and he just went out there and did what he was supposed to do because he was scared. What was the feeling on your side of what took place there?
For that first Japan show, I was in the truck, so I was not backstage, but I was watching it happen, and I can tell you that it felt like a volatile situation, and we were far away from home, and things were very much out of our control, and we felt that way. Sakuraba wouldn't leave the octagon. The crowd was not happy. Our local partner was not happy and wanted some retribution. I remember looking through the monitors in the truck and seeing Bob and David involved in very intense conversations with our partner. And 5 minutes later, Conan was back in the octagon. It felt like something we needed to do. It certainly wasn't a battle that we thought we could win. And oh, by the way, we're on TV, so we've got to keep things moving. So yeah,
and I mean, Meyrowitz is a brilliant mind. Like, the guy is absolutely David Isaaks. You guys just had top tier thinkers, and they've got to be saying to themselves, whatever takes place here is going to really affect us at home in the United States. This is what's going to be used against us.
Well, I don't know about that. I think the issue is more the immediate situation of, we have an arena full of unhappy people. We have a Japanese fighter who won't leave the octagon. We have our local partners who are demanding something. How are we going to solve this right now? I don't know that you get past, what's going to happen. I don't know that you're thinking about what's going to happen next week, especially when you're on live TV, and the arena feels like a pressure cooker. And yeah, I don't know that was a real concern. Obviously, it was an unorthodox situation, like many that happened in the UFC, and you do the best you can. You try to make the best decision you can, and you move on. Keep it rolling. You got to keep it rolling.
Yeah. John Perretti, it's his first show with you guys. Was he accepted right away? He's the new guy. Is there a feeling out process?
If you know John, or you've talked to John, you know that he's usually the one doing the feeling out. I mean, obviously, the fact that we hired John was a message, or should have been a message to him, that we're happy that he's part of the team. We want him to be part of the team. As I said, John was an excellent matchmaker. He did a great job. So regardless of what had happened with the New York situation, and not even really knowing his personal involvement, I didn't know John until he worked for the UFC. And when he came to work for the UFC, I was happy he was there because I knew he was going to do a good job, because I know he had done a good job for Battlecade.
Yeah, it's history.
So,
yeah, it's history. Yeah.
So anytime there's someone new floating around, there's that, momentary feeling out or discomfort or whatever. But I don't remember feeling that way. I certainly don't remember resenting him or having ill feelings towards him. It's different for him walking into a situation where he's outnumbered, walking into a situation where he's suddenly working for the competition. We were rivals, we were enemies for years, and now he's part of the team, but he was part of the team, and we accepted him as such. I like to think so. At least I felt like I did. I felt like David did. I felt like Bob did.
Jeff Blatnick was named as the new commissioner at UFC 17. In the rules meeting, he instructed everybody to start using the term mixed martial arts instead of NHB in order to kind of change the perception. A little bit of controversy in regards to the coinage of mixed martial arts. John Perretti, firmly claims it's him. Rickson Gracie has put his name forward. Jeff Blatnick, I haven't heard him claim like coining that phrase. What do you remember about that?
Excuse me. I remember that we went through, I used to write all the outward communications. I used to write the commercial, things like that. So we would use terms like, most intense full contact event, no holds barred. We went through the gambit. As far as who coined the term, it's probably Perretti, to tell you the truth. And I'm sure it was something that we picked up on as something that sounded less violent than no holds barred, sounded less violent than maybe some of the things we were using at the time, sounded sporting. So, anytime we made a move like that, it was to improve perception or impress or cable operators or politicians or athletic commissions. Most of what we did on that front was purely for that. But if I had to guess who started that, it was probably John Perretti, because John was mixing martial arts.
Dude,
if you know John,
so far ahead of his time. Yeah,
he was mixing martial arts from the time he was a kid. So it would make perfect sense that he would coin that term. He had probably been using it for decades before putting it into print or on air. And I don't know how it made its way to us, but sounded good. So let's go with it.
Fair enough. UFC Brazil, Pat Miletich beats Mikey Burnett for the inaugural 170-pound title. Pat fights a few times. You guys aren't doing enough events. Pat fights a few times outside of the organization. He actually fights 4 times, and he lost 2. He lost to Nakao, and he lost to Pele Landy. As an organization, were there rumblings? Were they pissed off at Pat because of this?
Yeah, I mean, you certainly don't want your high-level names, not to mention your champion, fighting in other organizations. So, yeah, that's not something that we liked.
Were there discussions with Pat in regards to this?
Not by me. Perhaps Bob, perhaps John, but Pat's manager, Monty Cox, was always looking out for his guys. Fighters want to fight. I get that. So, I was not personally involved in handling that situation with Pat. I can tell you we were not pleased by it.
Okay. At UFC 19, the Lions Den rivalry versus Team Punishment begins with Tito Ortiz, Guy Mezger versus Tito Ortiz. It's a rematch.
Well, it started with Jerry.
Polander, yeah.
Polander, yeah. And it continued with Guy. It actually came to a head with Guy when
Came to a head, yeah.
Tito put on the T-shirt, which was very disrespectful, and he flipped off Ken, which, Ken did not dig, of course. But, it was great for us, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, are you guys smiling watching this as it played out, or I had heard Ken actually talked to you guys about, please kind of intervene, talk to Tito, let's kill this thing, and it just kind of made things get worse.
Yeah, I mean, that was never going to happen. I don't know if Ken did that. It would not be in Ken's nature to try to diffuse a potential conflict. So I don't know about that. But I know that Tito was trying to make a name for himself and take a stand, and the T-shirts and the middle finger to Ken, and Ken was hot, and yeah, it was great theater.
Yeah, I agree.
And obviously it sets up the Tito Frank thing, which is awesome.
Yeah, with Frank Shamrock versus Tito. Frank retires after the fight. That's at UFC 22. I think we can all agree it was to get out of his contract.
Yeah. I mean, we couldn't pay Frank what Frank thought he was worth. He was right. He went on to a very lucrative deal in Japan, which dwarfed what he was making with the UFC. So sad that and disappointing that Frank did that, but certainly from a business standpoint, he's got to go to the best situation for him.
Yeah, he retired for 15 months, later fights in K1, and he's got 7 more fights underneath his belt. Frank credits Bob Meyrowitz and for his growth and help and understanding of the business world. We surprised, like he says those things, but in terms of loyalty, the minute he could exit the stage with a belt, I mean, he took that opportunity literally, right at the post fight. Did that surprise you guys?
I mean, we were surprised and we were disappointed. Frank was our champ. We all loved Frank. He was a great spokesperson and ambassador and an athlete on all levels. Frank was the best. And if Bob liked you and trusted you, he was honest with you. And I know that he was honest with Frank, and I know that Bob probably wished he could have paid Frank more and what he was worth. And at a different time, who knows what we could have done with Frank. But it doesn't surprise me that in the same sentence that Frank says, I wanted to retire, I had to leave, I had to do other things, he says, I really admire and I respect Bob. Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's your 205 belt. Couture had already left with the heavyweight belt. You guys put it around Bas Rutten. Bas Rutten retires because of injury. Like you guys, and Pat Miletich at this point is losing fights outside of the UFC.
Well, Bas, if you back it up, Bas had actually relinquished his belt because he wanted to go down and fight Frank at middleweight. He wanted to win both belts. Ultimately, injury sidelined him. Wish we had gotten Bas 5 years earlier, but it just didn't happen. So I'm sorry. Your question was?
Yeah, I mean, it's like your titles. They're a mess.
Yeah, everything was a mess. The show was a mess. It was survival mode. We were very much fighting to stay alive.
That's crazy, man. It's
doing
crazy.
Our best. Yeah,
nuts.
This was a very small. This is a layout. This is a very small staff. I mean, in '98, Isaaks leaves, so left in the office, you've got Bob, you've got myself. We had our coordinator, Paula Romero, who was very important in those days. And we had our accountant, Stephen Loeb. And that was it. And we had John Perretti as an outside, as a matchmaker. And that was it. We had Joe Silver as a consultant as well, but really the staff working day to day on the show was me, Paula, and Steven. Because also in 1998, so Isaaks leaves, so everything kind of falls on me. But at the same time, Bob starts something called IATA.com. Bob does a startup. The startups were the fever of the time. And so late 90s, Bob gets his own startup going for internet radio, multiple channels, endless advertising streams. There was an MMA channel as well. So, I mean, it was survival mode. We did the best we could with the resources we had and the limited budgets we had. The goal at that time, the mantra at that time was just get the show on the air, just get the show done, stay out of court. It was sadly, it was not a situation where we were sitting back thinking, oh, how can we make this better? And who can we bring in to make this bigger?
Oh,
it was
just trying to
more
survive.
About we just gotta get it done. Because if we don't get the show done, we don't get the ancillary revenues from pay-per-view, home video, foreign TV deals. It was just get the show done. And that became my purpose in life. When I tell you that we were stretched, after David leaves, after the in-house producer had left, I would spend all day in the office. Then I would go over to the edit room till midnight, 1, 2 a.m., working 14, 16 hours a day for years for the UFC. And we all had that kind of attitude and commitment and blood, sweat, and tears. And I can look back now, 20 years later, and nostalgia has taken over, and you dwell on the happy times and how cool it was and how interesting it was and how meaningful it was, how historical it was. But it was a grind, and it was survival mode, very much. And there was a very small group of people doing very big things to keep the sport alive.
Wow. And UFC 23 Japan was November 19th, 1999. First event you guys did that was not released on DVD or VHS. I was told that there was a lot of partying as well. Like, you're talking survival mode, bubble gum and tape to kind of make things happen. I'm also hearing there's a huge party every single event as well on the administrative side.
Party?
Do you want me to just be direct in regards to the question?
Yeah. Wait, we're talking about Japan. This is the second Japan show?
Well, around this time is when there's rumors of lots of coke and partying and stuff like that behind the scenes.
Oh, honestly, I have never heard that. And I can tell you that in my 7 years at the UFC, I never saw a line of cocaine anywhere, me personally. So we smoked a lot of grass and we drank a lot of beers. I can tell you that. And a lot of that was being done in my room. but
that people in alone.
But that wasn't my scene. So I don't know about that. And there's always a lot of partying because it's a show, and you got to decompress and blow off steam and things like that.
For sure. Organizations, you're dealing with a lot of people that like to put their foot on the gas pedal. That's the fight game. Yeah. And I'm hearing money issues, lots of partying, even on the fighter side as well. And
I mean, if you're talking about the staff, there was
the staff.
But there was only it was me, Paul, and Steven, and Bob, basically. So there wasn't much staff. I don't know that those guys were big parties. I'd be curious. Maybe offline you can give me the source on that or the backstory on that.
I don't know about the source.
That wasn't
what I heard.
That wasn't my scene. Like I said, we all used to like to get after it. And we all used to like to celebrate the success of getting another show done. But I don't think that correlates to the shows we were doing in Japan at the time, because it was just the fighters over there and really myself and John and Paula. And as far as the home video thing, that was just a shitty business situation where we lost our biggest, most lucrative home video deal, the Blockbuster deal, the Trimark deal. So again, it was just kind of a sign of the times. The show was waning, popularity was waning. Obviously, we had been starting to get shut off in 96, 97, really, really hard times. But I don't know that those hard times translated into hard partying.
Well, here, let's relate it to modern day.
Yeah.
There's some incredible organizations coming up. I work for BKFC, currently. Karate Combat is making some big waves. Look at some of the Karate Combat events. Like that's a big party over there. Like there's fighting, it's great, but you can tell there's an element of a lot of fun taking place. UFC 24, Kevin Randleman versus Pedro Rizzo. You guys, as we had discussed, the title situation is incredibly volatile. And now you got a main event where Kevin Randleman slips on some curtain poles, gets knocked out backstage before they walk out that curtain.
Yeah, actually, it happened early in the show. Kev was out signing autographs, and on his way back to the backstage area, instead of using one of the marked exits or entrances or going through the main walkway, he went through the drapes. Anyone that's been in a concert or arena backstage event knows that a lot of the gear gets put behind the drapes. He goes down, whacks his head, cannot fight. Yeah, very, again, more adversity, more craziness. It was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. Bob wasn't even there yet. I was alone. I don't know if Bob's flight, something happened. Bob was on his way. Bob was not in the building. So I was the ranking executive in the building. But that said, the decision was easy. I talked to Dr. Istrico. He explained to me what had happened. He had seen it. He had evaluated him. And I said, well, can he fight? Should he fight? And Dr. Istrico said no. So that was one of the easiest decisions. That was one of the easiest decisions I ever made.
Yeah, no, that's it. I mean, one death in that ring at this time, the sport wouldn't even exist today.
Not even that. It's just not acting in the fighter's safety.
Best interest.
Best interest of the fighters. We would never have done that. Say what you want, but from the beginning, we had Dr. Istrico ringside, at least, and he was a New York Athletic Commission board certified doctor. We had pre-fight examinations. You had to show up with your tests and your EKG and your stress test. And if you didn't have those, you had to go to the hospital and get those done immediately before you fought. And then, we had the urine tests afterwards. So we never wanted to we never wanted to put the fighter's safety in jeopardy. We never wanted to put the show and the company in jeopardy. So we always took the precautions that were usually established by athletic commissions or whatever that was a priority for us always, from a business standpoint and from a fighter safety standpoint.
Right.
Couldn't let Kev fight.
No, for sure. You had mentioned you're trying to figure out when Dana White started being involved with you guys. The first time I could find him on video at a UFC broadcast was UFC 27. Ian Freeman versus Ted Williams in between rounds 1 and 2. You guys pan to the audience, and you could see Dana sitting in the audience.
27 is what city? What?
Oh, man.
I got it.
Yeah.
27.
It was right before Atlantic City. Atlantic City's 28. 25 is Japan.
Well, 27 is sorry. UFC 27 is Bad Boys, so that's in New Orleans.
New Orleans. Okay.
What's the main event on that one?
I don't know about the main event, but I know during Ian Freeman versus Ted Williams is where you see him.
Okay. So I mean the timeline on Dana is important because of Lorenzo, right? But anyways, you were saying.
Yeah. UFC 28, you guys go to Atlantic City, huge event. for you guys because it's a real, I'm not gonna say it's a real commission. It's one of the larger commissions. You guys are starting to gain acceptance. At this time, Dan Lambert also throws down $250,000 as a marker to have a seat at the table for purchasing of the UFC. That's him and his business partner, John Perretti.
Yes. I can tell you about that time. And Bob was very much involved with his new startup. And Bob was sick of putting in money. I think he had kind of reached his breaking point, so he was entertaining offers on the show. He was speaking to the Fertittas and Dana, the Zuffa group. He was also speaking to John's group. And I was in very close communications with John at that time, and John was very confident that they were going to get a deal done. I did not know about the deposit they put down, and I'm surprised.
Dan talked about it. Yeah, Dan Lambert talked about it.
I believe it if it came from the source. I don't know why they wouldn't put some sort of stipulation on that kind of loan, but I don't think Bob ever had any intention of selling the show to those guys. So perhaps
you had said in an interview with Todd Atkins that Bob Meyrowitz had no intention of selling the UFC to John Perretti.
That's correct. I know that because Bob told me that. I remember it like it was yesterday. Because I was talking to John all the time, and John was like wanting to make plans, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And I remember Bob standing in my doorway, and I said, "Bob, I just got off the phone with Perretti. He's talking like he's going to buy this show. What the hell's going on?" In Bob's very stoic and deliberate way, "James, I will never sell the UFC to John Perretti." And he walked away, and that was it. And that's all I needed to hear from him to know.
But you know Meyrowitz. Like, you know, Meyrowitz. Is this
do.
something just kind of like off the cuff to kind of calm you down?
No.
They're not for sale?
No, not at all. He was enlightening me and making sure I knew what he was doing.
Okay, did you know that the UFC was for sale at this point?
I don't know that I knew that the UFC was officially for sale. I knew that there were interested parties, and
okay,
Bob would be crazy not to listen to them. I knew of Bob's level of frustration. I knew of Bob's level of financial, putting up his own cash and not being happy about that. I knew of his new endeavor. He was very much involved. IATA got a ton of dough from a big
They sold
bank.
Too. Yeah, they sold.
I don't know what happened, but they got a ton of dough from a major bank in New York. And, the SEG office was full of IATA employees, not UFC people. So the IATA was a real thing, and Bob was in charge. They had studios, they had shows, they had ad sales, they had graphic design, they had web stuff. They were like a real startup. So his attention was diverted. He was still coughing up a ton of dough. We weren't seeing the return. We weren't making the headway, at least financially and on pay-per-view. We were making headway, as you said. We got New Jersey, and that's the crazy thing is in those days we were constantly walking the line between mainstream success and absolute failure. Right? It was like this far apart. So I certainly understood why he would be entertaining offers, but I think he was being completely honest with me when he told me that I will never sell this show to John Perretti.
All right. How well do you know Bob and how he makes his business moves? Like, can you forecast that? Like, you know him well enough at this point you can kind of understand his motivation or movements?
I haven't spoken to Bob in a very long time. I mean, I knew him very well from 1995 to 2002.
Okay.
So I'm happy to
very
use
well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
All right. So do you think that Dan Lambert maybe put that money up as a way to help the Japan show, UFC 29, actually take place, as well as put John Perretti on ice? Because John also has other contacts, like his Extreme Fighting Battlecade was backed by Bob Guccione. Do you think this is just kind of a way to where, all right, we're going to deal with Zuffa. We don't want any moving parts coming into play to affect our negotiations. Dan, appreciate you funding the money. Talk to Perretti. Tell him you guys are business partners, and we're going to go behind his back and move it in a different direction.
I mean, I certainly cannot tell you what Bob was thinking or what he was doing. I would assume.
Is it possible?
I would assume, of course, I would assume that you have interested parties that want to purchase the show. Maybe you say to them, hey guys, you don't want us to miss a show. I don't have the money to do the next show. Can you help me out with the next show? And we'll continue our talks. I mean, I could see that happening.
I can even bolster my belief in that. UFC 29 Japan, John Perretti was fired after that.
Well, John is not hired by so Zuffa comes in. Zuffa comes in after that Japan show. Zuffa comes in January of 2001. I guess is probably when the deal is done. And I don't see any. I don't think Bob had anything to do. Bob had nothing to do with John not working for Zuffa. Zuffa had purchased a show. Zuffa were the new bosses. And I don't believe at any time they had a genuine or sincere intention to have John Perretti be their matchmaker.
What gives you that idea?
Well, I don't think they ever communicated with him, and they hired Joe Silva. So,
and John was also under the impression that he was buying the company.
Yeah,
and Joe Silva at this time was like an office manager. Like he was somebody that would just come to the events. I have spoken to people off the record that worked with Joe that would say, dude, he was the guy that got us coffee. He was the guy that got us coffee. You just kind of fell into a role that a lot of people couldn't fit. And he did a great job with it, but a lot of people just didn't have the skill set to do it.
Okay, so there's a lot there.
Yeah.
Let me start with Zuffa purchases the UFC. Obviously, they're going to do what they want, hire who they want. As far as Joe Silva, Joe was never in the office, so he wasn't an office boy. What Joe was a consultant, I would say, a super fan who we would get.
There you go. You just said it right there. Super fan. Yeah, somebody that you guys are kind of like.
We would get, but I don't want to diminish Joe. He was never on staff.
What he became and what he was.
Yeah.
Sometimes are two different things. Like what he was. I'm going to shut up.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But from the beginning, even though Joe was a super fan, he had access. Like, Joe could get, Cameron McLaren would take Joe Silva's phone calls. David Isaaks would take Joe Silva's phone calls. I would take Joe Silva's phone calls. Joe was our super fan, and we valued that feedback, and we valued his opinions about things. Didn't always agree, but it was always good to get feedback from someone like that. And as a result, we started bringing Joe to the shows as some sort of compensation. I think when David took over, he was put on a small monthly stipend, and he would do some of the advanced phone interviews and stuff just to get the prep sheets together for the office and the broadcasters and things like that. As I said, so Joe through that had established a lot of relationships with fighters, and someone he established a very good relationship with was Tito Ortiz. And Tito was the golden boy of the Zuffa crew. They loved him. They would do whatever Tito said. And he was the coolest, and he was the toughest, and he was the awesomest. So I think Tito recommended Joe. I don't think those guys wanted to work with John Perretti. And I think
what gave you that feeling?
Well, they never talked to me about him. They never talked to him about staying on. It was kind of and I think John was doing a movie in Italy at the time, So I don't know that he was around so much or easy to get to, but I don't think they ever considered things, and they just kind of let it fall. Because Tito recommended Joe, and Dana got along with Joe.
And Tito was managed by Dana right around this time for sure.
When the Zuffa Boys bought the show, Dana stopped managing Chuck and Tito, but
the relationship was there.
Yeah, they were all very tight. Gordon Biersch was a sponsor, which was a Fertitta Enterprises business.
Yeah, they sponsored John. They sponsored John Lewis too.
Yeah, they set up Tito with a new manager. But Tito was the champ. Tito was the face. As I said, they loved him, and they would do anything he said. And Tito was very fond of Joe and spoke very highly of Joe. And I think Dana and Joe must have hit it off. Joe must have impressed Dana, because when I got to Las Vegas in the summertime of 2001, Joe's office was right next to mine, and he was the matchmaker. And he very much had Dana's ear. Very, very influential in those early Zuffa days.
Who did they transition him with as a manager? Do you remember?
Oh, what was his name? He was a lawyer, a Las Vegas lawyer. Was his name Gallo? I don't know.
Okay, either way. That UFC Japan show didn't go off without a hitch. I know there were some issues with the scale. Dennis Hallman and Jeff Monson came on our show and just said the weight was off. The person handling the scale, I think it was Romano, I want to say, allowed them access to it. Paulo Romero. So they were jumping off of their bathroom sink onto the scale and were going to break it prior to weigh-ins. What was the chaos like? Because I heard it was nuts.
That sounds like something that I would not have been told about or been in the room for, frankly.
Okay.
I mean, there's a certain amount of winging it in general, and there's definitely a certain amount of winging it when you're 8,000 miles away from home. So I cannot comment on the specifics. I don't know the specifics of that story. I was not in the room.
But you were at weigh-ins, and Yuki Kondo went ballistic because he said it was off, and all the Americans were drinking water.
Yeah, I don't remember too much about that.
UFC 30, Dana White's introduced to the fans. Did you and Dana get along at this point?
Yes. Yes. I first met Dana when he was Chuck's manager. I would talk to him on the phone all the time. Dana was very tenacious and would call the office a lot to lobby for his guys and fight for his guys. And whenever Bob didn't take his call, I ended up talking to Dana. So I knew him as Chuck's manager, and then Chuck and Tito's manager. Nice enough guy, fighting for his guys, always trying to get something going, always trying to accuse us of having more money than we did. So, there was, as there often is, management versus show, adversarial nature. We were fine. And I guess the first time I really had to start taking him seriously is when so that last Japan show, the Zuffa crew came to that show. Obviously Dana was there because Tito was fighting, but Lorenzo was there. Maybe Frank Fertitta was there as well. I know John Hertig, who was the CFO of Fertitta Enterprises, he was there. So they sent a posse, and they were talking to me at the post-fight party, and this is December. They were talking to me like it was a done deal. I mean, they were asking very specific questions. They were asking about numbers. They were asking about fighters. They were asking about locations. They were asking about logistics. So I suddenly had to take these guys very seriously. Now, I didn't vision that Dana was going to be a part of that. I knew Dana as a manager. I think it wasn't until I remember I was driving down to Atlantic City, going down to to scout the Taj or a meeting with the Taj because we had a show coming up in February. And Dana called me on the way and he said, yeah, it's a done deal. We just bought it and I'm going to be the president of the UFC. And I said, really? Yeah, I was like, really? So he's like, yeah. And, suddenly my perspective had changed. But to answer your question, yeah, we got along fine. I mean, were we hanging and boys? No, but I wasn't hanging in boys with any of
anybody. No,
yeah,
that's smart.
Wouldn't have been wasn't something I was totally into. So yeah, I mean,
well, I think what's important also, like we had mentioned, what Joe Silva was and what he became are two very completely different things. Dana White also falls into that category. What he was and what he is now, it's stratospheric is what his rise was and how he's handled the pressure. And, Joe Silva also falls into that category. So anyone thinking there was a little bit of us diminishing him, not the case. It's just people grow.
For sure.
You guys reorganized weight classes in 31, but UFC 33, and we're wrapping up. UFC 33 is commonly referred to as the worst UFC to have ever taken place. Dana White still references it today about what of like a clunker of a card that was. How close was Joe Silva to being fired? Because it was their entry into Las Vegas, first time there, and they came with that.
There were a lot of discussions after that show. A lot of things went wrong. I don't think that it was ever discussed that Joe would be fired. Joe was very influential. Dana leaned on Joe a lot. As far as the fighters, you have to remember, this was new to the Zuffa guys. This was new to Dana. And Joe was someone who had been around a while and knew the guys and was plugged into those worlds. So they respected his opinion. So in many ways, I think, especially in the early days, Joe was something of I want to say a crutch, but a very, very valued advisor. So, the one thing you cannot control is the fights, right? We can control everything else, but we can't control the fights.
Yeah.
So, everyone has a bad night. And, there's so many factors that went into that night. The fact that we were in Vegas, the fact that we were back on TV, I think affected the way the guys fought. In previous UFCs, guys came in to make a name. They knew they had to win to stay. Now they can smell the money. They can see the fireworks. We're in this big arena. We're in Vegas. So maybe guys are fighting not to lose. Maybe guys are less aggressive than they could have been just because they don't want to miss out on the cash grab and the everything. So yeah, that show is a nightmare. And I was going to resign after that show. So it was, that show.
You were done. Were you burned out?
Yeah. I mean, it was just such a kick in the balls after being kicked in the balls so many times. And, we had an incredible, those first 6 months of Zuffa were unbelievable. I mean, we ripped off 2 shows at the Taj. We did the Meadowlands. We went to see Pride. We went to a Pride show, which was a whole thing. They put more money into the production. They sent me, I went and visited Tito. I went to visit Randy. I went and visited Pedro in Rio. I went and visited Elvis in Australia. It was, we were killing it. And then to get back on and have the fights suck so bad. And the show ran long. I fucked up.
It ran long. Yeah.
I fucked up huge. And I don't know if it was the show going long, the fights sucking from top to bottom, or the fact that during the main event, people were leaving the arena. I was like, oh my God, all that we've done, everything to get to this. And, it was crushed. I was crushed. And I wore so much shame and embarrassment and guilt because I made a mistake that I should never have let happen. Yeah, the fight sucked, and you want to blame the matchmaker, you want to blame the fighters, whatever. But there were a lot of errors made that night. I probably should have. Go ahead.
The mistake that you had said that you had made, was it because you didn't put one of the swing matches after the main event?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
It
happens.
It shouldn't have happened. I was rolling the dice. I was playing the odds. I thought there's no way every fight's going to go the distance, and sooner or later we're going to get a knockout. And by the time it was too late, I was committed. So yeah, so on all levels you can think of, what was supposed to be our most triumphant moment, our biggest show, our entree into Las Vegas, was a fucking nightmare. And I was never the same. And I lost my focus and my ability to do the show. And I took out a lot of the shame and embarrassment and anger that I felt on the people around me. And that's when like me and Dana got along fine, and we got along great until then. And it was not long after that these guys started to get worried about money. I mean, that's funny to say, because they would have another, whatever, 4, 5, 6 years of pain and go into their pockets another $50-60 million. But I can tell you that towards the end of their first year of ownership, they were starting to panic about dough, and budgets were addressed, and discussions happened, and I didn't agree with everything, and I didn't agree with some of the matchmaking as well. And whereas I should have just shut my mouth, I became the bitter guy in the room, and ultimately that led to my demise. But that had to happen. It was okay that it happened.
At UFC 35, a lot of the fighters on the card, including the staff, came down with an illness, food poisoning from the restaurant. Do you remember dealing with all of that?
Yeah, I mean, there's just not much you can do. It didn't happen to me, luckily. But yeah, it was just another thing. Obviously not ideal, but what can you do? What can you do? But I mean, everyone has to handle it the best they can. We're not going to cancel the show, I can tell you that. So you find a way. Look, like any adversity in business, you find a way to deal with it, and you move on the best you can. But it was certainly not ideal.
Yeah, Bustamante, BJ Penn, everybody had it. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. I don't know if we actually pinpointed what snack bar or what restaurant it was. Luckily, I wasn't part of the group.
Yeah, Lindland also had it in our interview with Lindland. He'd mentioned he was sick. Yeah.
Weird thing. Bizarre things.
Yeah.
Weird things used to happen to us all the time. Sad but true.
Yeah. After you left, the WWE UFC connection really started taking place. They started almost trading administrators. Were you part of that reason?
Well, what do you mean?
Here UFC. Well, right now there's UFC and WWE are
now,
constantly changing, but UFC 42 they brought in a couple of WWE people, and they were piping in crowd noise, and it was after you had gone.
Honestly, after I was dismissed after 35, I didn't watch the show for a very long time, and I wasn't in touch with a lot of people. So I don't know. I know that they went through a lot of different incarnations, production wise and executive wise, and a lot of turnover. But I don't know the details of that. The only WWE swerve into the UFC is when Bob was trying to get them to buy it back in the day
With Vince McMahon.
Yeah, So obviously now they have the same parent company, but I was not aware of the 42, what you just referred to. I was not aware of that.
Okay, was it 42 or 44? Yeah, either way. Yeah, and it's 42. It's wild that, like, I know Shane McMahon wanted to buy the UFC. Vince ultimately said no, and whether they liked it or not, they're in bed together now. That's wild.
It is. It is. I mean, it's more about Endeavor than either of the organizations. I think Endeavor just recognizes the value in owning content and having similar brands, or at least potential for cross promotion, things like that. So, I mean, it doesn't surprise me at all. Part of the reason I got hired at the UFC is because I had worked at the WWF. I believe that. So I always thought that the UFC should be the show and spectacle of the WWE with the reality and intensity of a big time boxing event. That was always my dream. And I remember telling that to Dana, and he'd be like, yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I'm so proud of what those guys were able to accomplish. I like to think that I played a role, however small, in the sport's development and the show's development. I carried the baton for one of the legs of the relay race. I am amazed at the success that Zuffa and now Endeavor and Dana specifically has been able to take the show to. But the reality is we all knew that it had this potential, which is why we all worked so hard at it. We all knew that it was something special. We all knew that it could explode if given the right situation and exposure. And happily that has happened. So very, very pleased, very proud of the work I did and the work that they do now. It's unbelievable.
James Werme, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, man, for coming on.
Thank you, Mike. I enjoyed it, and I enjoy the show. Keep up the great work.
Yeah, that SEG Dark era. The thing is, it's clouded with people that don't do interviews, and they won't do interviews. I mean, Perretti went multiple decades without doing them. I mean, you've done a few as well, like Maurice Smith, John Lewis. Those guys, they don't do. Frank Shamrock, they don't do them. So that dark era, it's important, man. It's important. I think that Carlos Newton, another guy, refuses to do them.
Well, it's perhaps the most important because the show could have gone away. The show could have gone away very easily. The show could have gone away without the hard work of a small group of very dedicated people and the fans. I mean, you talk about the fans that stuck with us, and the limited press outlets that we had that covered the show. Everyone was digging deep and blood, sweat, and tears, and very, very family vibe, working towards a common goal, working towards a cause that we believed in. We knew we were right. We just needed to educate the public. So those are very important years.
Yeah. Dude, we knew we were right. You just needed to know that. That's essentially what you just said. Yeah.
That's how we felt.
Watching it, just like puzzled. Like, you like the fight game, but you don't watch the UFC. Like,
yeah,
it's wild.
Fight.
Yeah. James, thank you so much, sir. Greatly
Mike,
appreciate
thank you. Take care.
Take care.
Check out the full interview on iTunes, Spotify, and all major podcast platforms.